Okay, it's red. Hey, good evening. Well, uh, I wanted to clear some false impressions that people have, and of course, the subject of of all of those false impressions or judgmental impressions and opinions that are given are about Alfred. Alfred is a magnet for controversy and judgmental opinions being given. Now, let me just give you a bum's rush through the history of Alfred. Alfred showed up on our doorstep very early in the morning, I don't know, 6 or 7 in the morning, I think it was, in a tricycle with his suitcase, and announced that he had come to stay for 7 weeks. There was only one thing that was wrong with this, was we didn't know who he was. We'd never exchanged any messages, he'd never got in touch with us. He just embarked on this adventure without mentioning it to us. Well, what eventually happened is that Beth suggested that we put him up for a couple of nights. My take on it, my immediate sort of reaction to it was that we should take him down that day, that morning, and fix him up with a room in a boarding house. And then we could help him to do whatever it was that he wanted to do. Now, he had come from Thailand, where he'd been for a number of years, and had been actually separated from the woman that he was married to for something like, I think it was about 12 years. Now, whenever marriage was mentioned to Alfred at that time, he always said, no, it would be much too difficult. I don't know whether I'm divorced or not. Now, some people had difficulty with this idea that a person could actually be divorced or not, but not know. Well, if you have never heard from your separated ex again in 12 years, it's absolutely feasible that you wouldn't know whether you were divorced or not, because if she didn't know, or he didn't know where you were, then that person, if it suited them, could go ahead and get a divorce and not mention it to anybody but the people that it concerned. So he came to us because he wanted a new kind of life. Now, we've been accused of all kinds of things with Alfred. One particular one said that we'd ripped him off for 140,000 and then dumped him. We've never ever been able to dump Alfred, because every time he gets something that needs to be resolved, he comes to us. So we are friends with Alfred. Alfred is not an easy man to be friends with, because he is he's a man of firm opinions, let's put it that way. He thinks what he thinks, and he thinks he's right, and that makes other people wrong. So sometimes it can be difficult, because when he tells his stories, he tells them in real time. That means that every single second of whatever he is recounting is recounted again, which makes listening extremely challenging. So, what did he do once he got here? Well, he hooked up with Talia, and he was with Talia for a little while, I think, possibly 2 years. Talia is an extremely religious person, and her religion and God and the worship of God comes very high on her list of priorities. So it didn't actually work out for Alfred. As far as we gather, and without going into more detail, never a kiss was exchanged between them. So they eventually parted company. Now, this was only after Alfred had bought a piece of land in what has become an accepted way, whether it's accepted or not is another thing. But what happens with an expat is that they come over here and they find a partner, and everything is going well with the partner. They buy a piece of land in the name of their Filipino partner, and then, in order to protect themselves as insurance against a possible breakup in the future, they then take out a legal document saying that they are leasing the land for a period of 25 years. Well, as many of you have so rightly, perhaps, or not, have said, Alfred is looking older than he is. I believe he's about 65. So whether he is or not doesn't matter. It's nobody's business but his. And that's what I would like to set straight here, is that for all of you that are extremely opinionated and actually not very nice often about Alfred, maybe you ought to ease up a little. Unless, of course, your application for perfection has come through from the good Lord himself. I actually had a word with God a little while ago, and I asked him, God, can I, you know how you speak to God, God, Heavenly Father, can I be perfect? And he was so accommodating. He said, absolutely, Terence, you can be perfect. There's only one problem. Perfect is on back order, and so you'll have to wait until it's your turn. And then, in the meantime, perhaps you can just keep on being nice to people. So, be nice. Is that so difficult? Do you really have to put your razor edge on a judgment of someone who is actually a decent guy? Now, on to how decent he is. He tried for a while with Talia. It didn't work. He felt that he was not, that there was no affection there, and that it was not going to work. Now, in her leaving, she went, where did she go to? Well, we built Talia a house, and we rescued her and her family before Alfred ever came on the scene. And courtesy of Manninglina had built a new house, and the tiny house that she used to live in, and in which Taliklik had been born, was vacant. So she very generously allowed Talia and her two children or three children, I've forgotten. I think it's two. Is it two children, Beth? Two. So Talia and her two children stayed in that house. Now, it all got messy after that, and there's no need to dredge it up. But Alfred came along, and Talia struck up a friendship with him, which led to him actually thinking that it could work for a lifetime partnership. It didn't. Now, that's where the subject of marriage always came up. When Alfred talks about marriage, and when he was most discouraged about marriage, was that because he is German, everything, all documents would have to be translated into German. The Germans are extremely difficult, apparently, on all of this documentation. So it would all have to be translated for Alfred into English and then into German. And the German documents, in order for his new partner, whoever she may be, would have to be translated into English and then possibly into Visayan. So it starts to get extremely complicated and messy. And he just backed off and said, no, I don't think I can do that. And then that comes in about the divorce. He said, I actually don't know whether I'm divorced or not. And people found that extremely strange. I personally didn't. But then I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, anybody who hasn't seen someone for 12 years may not know a great deal of things about that person. Okay, so no marriage was possible between him and Talia, but then it came to that it was not really a great relationship anyway. And I felt that he had tried honestly and it hadn't worked. So now he is living in a house that he built, paid for, and designed and built, and did a very good job on. Talia has moved either to the house that we built for her a long time ago, or she's living somewhere else. We're not in touch with Talia. We don't get on with everybody, and it's better not to get along with Talia. That it just, as so often happens, it didn't work. So that brings us up to what Alfred then got up to when he was a free man. By the way, when Alfred does leave us in that terminal way, then the land and the house on it belongs to Talia. So at some point in future, and she's not an old lady, so she will stand to gain by the death of Alfred, not to put it too delicately. So he is now looking for a relationship, or was. He was looking for a relationship, and I despaired at times about how he went about it, because many times he thought that he had found someone who would suit him, and the way that it worked out is that none of them worked out. None of them, some of them treated him badly, some of them evidently, sincerely thought that they could make a go of it with Alfred from afar. So video calls and still pictures of Alfred conveyed a different impression than the one that they got as soon as they landed on his doorstep. Okay, so where are we? He was eventually without a partner, and then he did find someone, but it always seemed to be that he found them in Manila, and then, as so often, this may ring a bell with some of you expats, that they always had debts to settle, and then they had to get their passport, or they had to do something, they needed this or that, and they had children, and their children were coming and they were not, and it always was extremely complicated. We always advised him to find someone here. Right, we're not in the business, as many of you who have asked us to fix you up with partners will know. We're not in the business of trying to fix somebody up. First of all, we don't know you, and often we don't know the woman. How can we fix anybody up? Now, that brings us to the present. So let's get that sorted out, and it's very, very simple. We suggested to Alfred, as he was living alone and he wasn't dealing with it very well, okay, our fear for Alfred as a friend was that if he did fall and he was there on his own in the house, he may not be able to get to a phone, he may not be able to move. People have said this about me, so it's real to me. Someone mentioned to me once, when the weather was permitting me to take long walks in the country. We live in hundreds of square miles of open countryside here in Bohol in the Philippines. So they said, you really should take a phone, because if you fall and you can't get up, then you're going to need help. And if nobody knows exactly where you are, it could be, well, it could be a long sleep, couldn't it? So we felt the same for Alfred. We wanted him to be taken care of. We're on low bat, so I can't keep on for too long. Right, we wanted to make sure that he was going to be okay. Now, one of the things about Alfred, as I said, he is very opinionated, but actually he's a good person, and he's made a lot of changes in all of this, the letdowns and what he considered betrayals, and a lot of people have judged him very harshly. Now, we suggested to him a wonderful girl, Marie. Now, we know Marie from old, and it was a case of two people who needed each other. Now, the only thing was that at first Alfred didn't realize what a wonderful girl Marie was. She felt comfortable with him and actually developed a great affection for him, if not love. Now, we suggested to him that he take her as a housekeeper with no romantic stuff involved, and he did that, and she was with him for 2 months, in which time he realized what a gem she was, and she is a good person. And what brought this to a head was that she was taken into hospital. Is it COVID? That's another video, because as soon as you go into hospital here, you are tested for COVID, and you're tested with a testing kit which has been proven to be totally unreliable and being used at a greater sensitivity than it was ever intended in the first place. Something like 24 units, apparently, is the measure, is what it was supposed to be tested at, and they've been testing at 45 units, which is almost double. So he's there, and he's realized now, after coming to talk to us again, he's realized that this lady is, in fact, his words were, there is no other woman like Marie in the entire Philippines. She is a wonderful woman. And the last time that I saw him, which may have been on the video that you all thought that I was shaking my head on, his words were that he was going to ask her to be his girlfriend. Now, as soon as that was gotten over, he now wanted also to talk about marriage. And the reason, for those of you who cannot understand this, which I cannot understand what you're in mystery about, is he's realized after living with this lady for 2 months, practically just the two of them, okay, and they found out a lot about each other. Now, he wants to marry her because it's the way that he can be sure, if he passes on, which is certainly to be allowed for in his state of health and age. He wants to make sure that she's going to be okay, and he knows about Talia and her